So let's see. What about Lothar Ried? We're calling Lothar Ried the last rapporteur for the workshops. Wonderful, great. Let me ask the organizer, Ms. Yeromin, can we start with the workshop summaries? Or do you want to usher in some more people? Because everybody is waiting in the live stream. Do we have the live stream running? So again, bear with us, everybody who is with us digitally here in the building. Some are outside having a coffee, exhausted from the workshops. And I went to the workshops. They were great. And we will hear more from the workshops in a minute or so. Wonderful. The room is filling up. Can I invite everybody to go to a seat so that we can start? Okay then, let's start. Welcome back to the auditorium and to the main program. And welcome to the last session for today. This is where we'd like to hear the results from the workshops. And later on, we'll hear a special guest before we will all bid you farewell to reach your trains and maybe not airplanes. But before you go home, the chair of the Sustainable Finance Advisory Board will join us for a final statement. But let me remind ourselves what we heard this morning from Secretary Al-Wazir. The economic and geopolitical context he referred to, which is challenging us to give a boost to transformation, which gives us a competitive edge as well, is an opportunity of innovation, the public sector as a role model in partnership with the private sector. And sustainable finance as such is not a given, but something we have to work on. And that's something we heard from the panels as well, and the keynotes that followed, first of all. Under Secretary Anna Luren reminded us that we have a mandate to fulfill, which is the Paris Climate Agreement, and the finance flows have to make sure that the finance sector and the real economy have to close ranks. And she also said there are two sides to the coin. The climate goals on the one hand, but social equity on the other. And that's especially where industrialized countries are called upon to support the emerging markets and those countries that are suffering from the flight of capital, among other things, and suffer the impact of the lifestyle and wealth in industrialized countries and bear the brunt of that. And reinsuring a balance through direct support and foreign direct investment. Followed by Dr. Sabine Maudreff from Deutsche Bundesbank, where she said environmental and climate risks are social risks as well. And that's why the central banks took into account climate risks and started decarbonization, naming the example of not only the Bundesbank, but the ECB as well, where for the first from the 1st of October, a climate score is used for the corporate bonds portfolio that the ECB is buying, and disclosure on that is expected for next year, the climate scores, that is. What she also made clear in a charming but unambiguous way is that the climate stress testing by the ECB for the banks leaves some room for improvement, that some homework still has to be done by the banks. And she reminded us that the network for greening the financial system involves very active work between the countries, the 120 supervisors globally, finding common ground to make sure that the 26 taxonomies that are in the making, there is interoperability as well. Just to remind us of the keynotes this morning. Then in panel 1, we talked about expanding the scope of action for the financial industry to play an active role, a more active role. And you may remember that impact was number 1 and opportunity number 2. During the exchange, we heard from KfW as a role model, as a development bank, which is in the process of building an impact measurement systems with 140 KPIs. And being honest that they're only at the start of this. Then the savings bank sector, the Sparkassen in Germany, again, the beginning of a sector exchange with customers, especially SMEs. And also the invitation from UBS, an international bank with a global footprint, to the call to learn from other countries. Here, learn from what's going well from governments in the UK, France, the Netherlands, or Luxembourg, as some examples. The second panel was a bit antagonistic, arguing, but in a good spirit. And just as in panel 1, we heard that small steps are needed. It doesn't have to be the big leap straight away. Very active dialogue between all the stakeholders. And some insights from the day-to-day business that I found very exciting is that there are conflicting goals for banks. They may want to learn a lot from their customers as far as their eco-balance is concerned, or their life cycle assessments, but they're also afraid of the business, or not winning the business. And it's not easy, and transformation has to be doable and realistic. And as far as the workshops are concerned, in the afternoon, accidentally, this is a group of men only. Alexander Bassengans should be Frau Lepata, really, and Oliver Hauner on the right stood in for his boss. She is not able to be here. Ms. Keffer Rohrbach, she had to leave. So forgive us, but we did take care of gender diversity, and I think generally we struck quite a good balance. So this is accidental. Thank you very much for being part of this panel of rapporteurs. And could you perhaps introduce yourselves briefly, Mr. Bassen? Alexander Bassen from the University of Hamburg. My research is on sustainable finance and has been for a while, 15 to 20 years. Member of the Sustainable Finance Board, the G7 Impact Project Task Force I'm a member of, and a member of EFRAG. The sustainability reporting standard for Europe has been developed by that group. Thomas Mook, head of project Net Zero Banking Alliance, an implementation platform to decarbonize credit portfolios, lending portfolios, and the cluster, which is one of the hosts today, is organizing that. Oliver Hauner from the German Insurance Companies Associations, non-life, technical insurance, statistics are among my responsibilities. I also teach at the University of Bonn, disaster relief, and those were the subject of the workshop. Christian Klein, professor for sustainable finance at the University of Kassel, and have been for 10 years. Not as long as Alex Bassen, but I've been around for a while. Old hands, right? Right, well, in that environment, I'm often involved in and meet the people that you will hopefully soon recruit, in other words, graduates, students graduating from Kassel, believing ESG is simply a natural component. And there are companies calling me interested in recruitment, so that was our workshop as well. Michael Kuhns, the Collaborating Center, Sustainable Production, a Think and Do tank emerging from the UN system. And our job is to link up the real economy with the financial industry. Transformation finance in the food sector was the subject of our workshop, and there were heated debates. Lothar Ried from Energie Baden-Württemberg, and we have actually 2 chairs when I'm one of the co-chairs in sustainability. Reporting is my focus, reliable but also doable reporting in various capacities. Wonderful. Mr. Bussen, I think you have to catch a train fast, so let's start with you. Workshop number 5, which was one of the 2 where I wasn't able to go there, but I would have loved to join that workshop. The academic or scientific perspective and approaches to transformation finance solutions from research, economic and financial research. It's quite a mouthful, but it does cover a lot of things. Could you give us some idea how many you were in the room and what people contributed and what their interest was? Well, we did a lot more than the short title allows to see. At the start, we looked at impact, which was mentioned before, and the question of measurability. Is it possible to measure that? So that was very interesting. The first presentation, the effect of divestments, and that effect can be measured, but also questions of transfers and operationalizing this subject. Eurosif has a new system to incorporate impact as well. Is it impact generating or impact alignment as factors? Something which is in line with what practitioners need, and also climate risks and how they can be measured better and how that can be communicated. Quite often it's a communication issue. That's what Sabine Mauderer said this morning as well. And of course the taxonomy, whether it's possible to measure its effects. And there we could see as well that the effects of green revenues can be measured, although companies don't have to report that yet. Through the data providers in the market, they can be made visible. So I hear you saying there's a lot of knowledge which hasn't really come up in reality or on an operational level yet. Well, in science, we only do reality, so to speak. Well, we can only work with the data that has been made available somehow. We'll do empirical work only, so we're always searching for data, and we can only reflect on or reflect what's there. A 20-year model theory study was also presented by somebody saying that green investment can have a positive effect, and we looked at causation. So yes, the science community can make a contribution. But you still have the knowledge gap, right? Which says that it's so difficult, we need more data, better analyses. It is difficult. It's not black and white or good or evil. When we talk about sustainability, it's always in an in-between area, so there will always be a discussion, a room for debate, especially this transitional period now in regulation, the SFDR, its introduction, where some have to report and others don't. And that means you have some distortion, some complexity, and over the next few years, all of this will become more balanced. And whenever we the scientific community can make a contribution, we will. Question, how long will it take for this balancing to happen? Because we have a finishing line as well when it comes to the climate goals. There are different levels. On the one hand, the social goals, the 1.5-degree goal, but not only the climate goal, but diversity loss, which is disastrous, social inequity globally, so many different issues to be covered. A lot of pressure for time. Some goals will not be reached. In some of the scientific community, there's agreement that the 1.5-degree goal is not really achievable anymore. So we have to make sure that we keep up the speed. That's the reason why the EU Commission comes out with things now that don't appear doable, because they're saying if we don't try, we won't reach anything. So some things at first will not be as resilient as they should be, but it's the only way to give a boost to this to make sure that it's likely to happen. Question, were there any eye-opening moments? Well, in science, you may be tempted to say about some things, this was clear anyway, and others say, well, this is incredible. And it was in between mostly. The question of risk measurement and the transition from pure risk to how can I ensure resilient systems, that was one eye-opening moment. And what Marco Rutten showed, that we do see that divestment has an effect, that can bring about changes. Something where our gut instinct told us it could work, and that now we were able to prove empirically that it can. Since you mentioned divestment, that always leads to the question of how you sell it, and will somebody else simply make the investment that sets less store by sustainability? Well, the good thing is that the story proved that this is a legitimate assumption. In the long term, the model has an influence on the capital cost. But it was good to see that for the divestments investigated, that years later, the emissions were also lower. The divestment is not only a step to say that the funding transaction we go for the share from A to B, but that it does have an absolute impact on emissions. That's indeed reassuring. Following up on that workshop, if you were to do a follow-up or continue the story, what would the next step be? Well, impact measurement would certainly be an important next step. We found it important because it's interesting scientifically, and we believe that this is important for practice and practitioners to move away from this anxiety-driven attitude, Article 8, Article 9 classified, where you'd simply end up on the blacklist. But we need empirical data to measure the impact. Christian Klein and Timo Busch and Marco Wiltens and we in Hamburg are working on that. And we believe that we can offer something which is quite a reasonable science platform or scientific platform. What about the next steps in terms of those that are interested in greater detail? Answer, there's this platform where we publish our results and policy briefs summarizing our research results, and our own websites. And at our events, you will find the information. We're always grateful for data because we're working empirically, as we said. So we can only use actual behavior and recorded behavior to derive recommendations both to practitioners and politicians. Great, thank you. A round of applause for this group. Okay, have a safe trip back. See you next time at the next Sustainable Finance event. Let's continue with the next workshop, number 3, financial risk, extreme weather events. What's the universe that's insurable, and to what extent is insurability a must-have ingredient for real estate transformation financing? Real estate again, quite a mouthful for a short workshop. Oliver Hermans, to my right, was in that workshop. And you also gave an introductory statement, right? Go ahead. How many people attended? What was the feedback? And how much did people know already? Well, I think people didn't really know so much or everything, but there was strong interest. About 120, including the online audience. And of course, you always have to ask yourselves, we discussed a lot about real estate today, energy, life cycles, but what about a piece of real estate, a property that you're not allowed to rebuild because it's, well, gone, and the money may be gone at the end of the day. And today, we took a look at the future, a glimpse at what to expect. We just heard that the 1.5-degree goal will not be achieved. Potsdam says we're 3 degrees off. The 3-degree pathway would mean a lot of damage ahead, irrespective of whether it's residential, commercial, retail, or housing. it hurts. So we worked through 3 statements. First of all, Tobias Fuchs from Deutsche Wetterdienst, first of all, who told us that the share of climate change is something that you can see from the data. All the things that came with a question mark before, what are you measuring? It's weather. What is weather? What is climate, etc. I think we've made quite a bit of progress there, and there was a lot of interest. Then data as well. Data again, and the German Meteorological Office, Deutscher Wetterdienst, has data. I downloaded it. That's good, but there's more to come. They have more in their portfolio. They also have the German Act on the Meteorological Office, so that you have to pay for the data, but it's definitely worth it. You mustn't forget that the data is public sector data, and there's, of course, administration, building permit, etc., rules behind it, and it's the same data used by the administration people and by the other side, by us and practitioners as well. So it speaks the same language, and the investor won't be able to wriggle out of that because it's the same reliable data and the same input from the 2 sides. And then we discussed what happens with the economic losses from extreme weather events. And Brigitta Stöver from the Society of Social Structural Research, and whoever has worked with data knows how difficult it is. You had this cone of uncertainty in one chart, forward-looking with a model. The timeline, well, it's what to expect in the next 30 years or so. And that's also the general climate overview that we'd be looking at. If we don't act, then we'd soon end up with a 3-digit billion amount in terms of the whole total economic loss. But it's also very clear, and we should know from the Stern report at the time, investing in adaptation means that a lot can be offset up front, and things will not become better. The real estate panel this morning mentioned that the customer will turn to the heating plumber and asking for when the investment will have paid for itself, compared to the problem now being that there might not be any gas anymore. So the impact of natural disasters on real estate in Germany, that's exactly everything between those extremes. And the question in the long run will be whether the building will still be there, or how strongly it may be damaged, and which losses or maybe also gains might happen, because it will upset a few things. I have a question at that point. How do you make sure, GVD, that the members in your association are all up to date, have the information, and can communicate all the dangers that are lurking there? We were faced with the same problem about 30 years ago when we had received the permit to insure natural disaster losses, but there were no data. And for 10 years, we've tried to use questionnaires surveying our customers, but it didn't work. Many have specific questions, or faced with specific questions that are needed for such a risk assessment, and they simply can't answer that. And then we tried to knock on the door of some public sector organizations, and it's really the same model. The EU Floods Directive, for example, for the flooding maps, all of those things, we did that ourselves. Then the flooding system in Germany, it's called Cirrus, the information system that we have in the insurance sector, which performs and offers much more than simply the risk of flooding, but counterparty-related risk assessments and specifying the expected risk and loss locally, and that not only for the volume business, but for banks, you might be saying, for the classic real estate financing transaction, single family or 2-family unit, compared to larger properties where you have to look at general risks. When you have a certain geographic position, then some areas will simply be more exposed than others. And to know that, you need data, and we can offer that with our systems. When you look at the insurance sector and others in your industry, how available is knowledge and data there? How do they know what they offer, what you offer? It's a balancing act. Some say you can never have enough data, but I think it's important to have the right data for the right risk assessment. What we have today, and what you have a lot of data, is retrospective data, the experience you have, the scientific models and results. One thing that you found difficult as well this morning is the forward-looking perspective. The supervisor wants us to be forward-looking. What will happen in 10, 20 years' time? Stranded assets, because there's something you overlooked today. Will your real estate be swept away by the floods because there's something you overlook? That's a tricky part of the balancing act. Pricing in and predicting something that relates to the climate. But the climate is a statement where when you look at a period of 30 years, the timelines are just so diverse. 30 years of climate predictions and a contract over 2 to 5 years and accommodating just the timelines, that's a huge challenge. What were the eye-opening moments, or maybe also the antagonistic moments in your workshop? When I entered the room, there was a question mark, the danger to assets, whether there shouldn't be some clear-cut bans. Well, that is a hot topic, a delicate topic. Where are the areas that in which you will be allowed to build at all tomorrow? And from our point of view, we have a clear opinion. From the two large-scale flooding events in Germany, we believe and we see that the many official flooding areas are areas where the risk cannot be handled anymore. Question, does that mean cannot be insured anymore? No, what I mean is this will have to be two-pronged. The Bank of England carried out a stress test of insurers in the UK and published the results, saying essentially that millions of risks in the real estate sector cannot be insured anymore because the risk is simply higher than what operators can afford, or they won't be able to afford, rather, or not being able to afford the insurance policies, so the uninsurable risk. And that is something we recognized, and there have been some adjustments based on climate, but what we have to invest in is prevention. Only if we manage to bring down the losses will insurance policies still be affordable. Collaboration will be needed, funding a piece of real estate over 10 to 20 years, and finding out how an insurer can be on board to absorb any risks and losses. That was an interesting part of our debate, where some legal considerations of these recent years have also meant that short-term contracts are what we should really do. Consumer protection, long-term contracts are not well liked. So perhaps in future we may have to rethink our business. That is one of the takeaway messages, rethinking our way of doing business in terms of data and data usage. Silos are appearing again. A natural disaster risk portal was one idea as an input for a system that will also be used by valuers and financiers of real estate. That would be good. And quite a few threads could join that, and the advisory board, blended finance, transformation finance, those would be the headings and bodies under which this could come. And I think a lot of stakeholders would be on board and would find this useful. Yesterday we heard the same thing, really, the mirror image of it, if you want, and our colleagues in Switzerland are further ahead than we are. They said, go ahead. There are certain things that you can't get rid of. In Switzerland, there are also 3 levels in a federal system, but there is a council, a body in which we talk, and when we leave again, we'll speak the same language with respect to our respective community. So we managed to build that portal in Switzerland, and it's great. What's the Swiss example again? Planrat, or Planning Council, where all stakeholders, insurers, engineering companies, the cantons, so everybody who has a say, really. And it's different from the round tables or square or any tables, really, that are simply window dressing quite often. This is something that has an impact and that politicians listen to. Wonderful. What's your last recommendation for those interested in greater detail? The DWD app, And when you're interested in sustainability, the principles for sustainable investment are something you will know, and the same exists for insurances, risk bearing, etc. We are involved online in the same questions of investments, really. I think the two industries could become a little closer. It's not only climate protection, it's also climate impact adaptation. Thank you very much, Oliver Hauner.
And with that, we'll move over to Michael Kuhns. I would have loved to attend your workshop, which started at 10:15, and it's something that's very important to me too. The title was Experimental Workshop on Transformation Financing using the example of the food industry. And as the name says, experimental workshop. Maybe you could explain what the experimental part of it was, starting at 10:15 this morning. Yes, I'll gladly do so. We started and tried to really establish a dialogue. We tried to go through the entire food chain, starting with the farmers. There was a farmer in the group, and she reported what her life is like at the moment, also in interaction with the banks. And up until the producers, there was one of the world's largest food producers in our group, and also the retail segment, a discount supermarket dealing with consumer questions. A consumer brand was represented. And our first question was, now, when you look at transformation, what to you are the key topics? What's most pressing? And we did the very same thing then on the financial representatives side. What are your topics? And that is kind of experimental because the angles they come from differ quite a bit. And we had to sort ourselves out in the room a bit. What are we actually talking about? Are we talking about the pioneers in sustainability and transformation carried by them, so a certain scale effect? Or, and we had a ratio of 80 to 20 in the room, 20% who already bring sustainability into the food chain, and the 80% that also, if you go into the trade and the retail segment, looking at a product, who basically say nothing on sustainability. And looking at the speed that we'd actually need for this topic, we would need to make progress here. So what's the experimental part of it? How can we trigger something to make it happen faster and going further? I mean, even for those 20% of the forerunners, we've already taken quite some time. So what would be the measures where both the financial sector and also the real economy can provide support? So we discussed that and tried to also ask questions such as, is it a question of either one or the other? So conventional industry and economy and then the pioneers. We looked at the bio segment as well. Or should there be something in between as well? So should the market refinance something if I'm still on my way? Because that's what also the farmer told us. She said, I can't carry too much debt if I don't know if I'll actually get it refinanced, because the market prices at the moment are shooting up and down all the time. I have a hard time calculating. I'd be ready to take on a loan for assets. If I buy a machine and equipment that's an asset, I can value that and I take on a loan for that. But if people expect me to also finance personnel costs when I want to do bio only, and I realize I've got 800,000 euros of cost per year which I don't get refinanced, then that kind of business model won't work. And that led to quite a strong discussion. It was quite emotional as well. I heard it when I entered. When I came into the room, obviously the farmer wants to make money on the work she does, and in many cases they can't. Answer, yes, exactly, and it's as simple as that. It's not just any country, this is Germany, where you would believe, hey, it might just work, actually. But she made it very clear what all of the barriers are that she's confronted with, but also that the market needs to appreciate, recognize that she's changing over, that the extra personnel cost needs to be refinanced via some kind of price premium in the market. And that's where the consumer brand representative came in, making it very transparent. So people also from the discount segment, I mean, we're always discussing chicken and egg. The ones are saying, well, we would if the consumers were ready to. And then I asked about it. I mean, even the discounter superstores and supermarkets have an increasing segment of bio produce. I just recently heard a figure of sales doubling or even tripling over a certain period of time. So there are consumers who do appreciate something being bio-sustainable. So once you're in that transition, I'm not yet a bio farm, I'm still transitioning, how to disclose that, make it transparent, and see that reflected in the market price. We also said maybe there should be some kind of transition label. Either conventionally there's nothing on the label, you don't learn anything, and then there's the bio-certified label, and shouldn't there be something in between? We were discussing something like rapid prototyping, really. That's why it was an experimental workshop. We discussed potential solutions and really sketched it. What could the label look like? What would we need to do for it? Who needs to be actively involved? What kind of corporations would we need? And I would hope that new corporations will come out of this. At least I heard some people say something to that effect. And I also believe that the farmer will receive a number of calls after this. And sometimes you just need to be listed on the shelves with a story behind it. Why is my product here on the shelf? And why is that product maybe a bit more expensive? If you can give the story because it's a sustainable product, and why can't we yet price and value sustainable performance in such a way that A, the financial market credits it, but also the customers credit them? Exactly, and that's the moment we are left for the next workshop. But this debate you were mentioning, that especially in the food segment, it's very often still reduced to the price. But it's about a sustainability service or product after all. Yes, exactly. It's not just the price. If I behave differently, it can be expressed either by giving the CO2 emissions. There's ways of expressing that. Du bist der Chef, you're the boss, that's a label, or Regionalwert AG, that's also a company who calculates those kinds of parameters. You can have it reflected on the balance sheet, you can monetize it. There's a lot of know-how out there. What we need now is that the retail sector accepts it, that the financial market takes it up, and that the other actors in the market also appreciate it as well, that there's quite some data, quite some material expressing the degree of sustainability, and also that there's areas where that's not a thing yet. I've just helped build up another organization on an old farm, a rural farm. I wouldn't call myself a farmer, but it's a bit of mini farming experiment going on there. We have a permaculture on the one side and a vertical garden on the other side of the property. The eco banks very quickly gave us a loan for the perma segment. For the vertical garden, we really took it from one bank to the next, also eco banks, and we kept hearing no, because it wasn't conceivable to them that a vertical garden where the salad, 6,000 units, grow in a container within a week at top quality, old seeds, and the nutrient solution even uses the remainders of the permaculture plants, but that's not yet in their system, so we get a no. I live in Bavaria, somewhere in the hinterland. Those farmers would leave the room now. Well, some of our bankers did too, because they think, what are they talking about? What's he telling me? And then we invite them to visit us at the vertical farm, and we invite a biologist as well, and then you can see their mindsets changing. And this eye-opening moment is one where the banker becomes a pioneer and no longer myself or us. And that's the interesting kind of dialogue we now have to go for. Thinking farming in different terms. It needs to be transformed, it needs to be digitized, it needs to be looking into very new solutions without forgetting the old ones that need to be further developed. So next food is also something we discussed widely. Alternative sources of proteins. We won't be CO2 neutral also in the retail segment if we continue consuming meat as we do. The moderator says, I'm happy to hear that as a vegetarian. And yes, exactly, that's scientific findings now, which can't be denied. So lots of transformation financing there. Obviously, in the past, when I was dealing with, or when I was focused on animals, and now I have to change over or find a second source of income, I need different types of financing. And if I'm to go into entirely new models, such as vertical farmings, I'm still a bit of a freak. So lots of work still to be done everywhere to make sure that and also there's arguments put forward that say vertical farming isn't really biofarming. Not the classical sense of bio or organic farming, and therefore it won't get financed. But there's so much sustainability that goes into it, so we need to work on that. I'm familiar with that line of argument. Now, what would be the takeaway for the financial sector now, and also for the, let's say, food industry, and mostly with a view to the farming industry? Well, it always sounds kind of banal if I say we need more dialogue, more discussions. But I was actually discussing with somebody representing the retail segment and said, do we need to invite them all? And I said, yes, we do. Maybe not all of them, but the most important ones. And going into an even more detailed discussion, really understanding this pioneering achievement, place it and position it better in the market, communicate it even more clearly. And that also goes to the financial sector. What we hear from the real economy is that there's a feeling that the financial sector is still pretty far away from the real economy in terms of the angle from which they view it. And I can only reflect that and confirm it. That requires some dialogue as well. And this retail chain maybe might invite some bankers and jointly visit the farmers and jointly go to those pioneers amongst them in order to then together say, okay, we'd be happy to go in there. And that's really it. And also the farmer, she made it clear, I don't need the one bank to provide me with a loan or to do something for me. I need the entire chain. I need the consumers and everything. If I go to my local bank around the corner and tell them I want to do organic farming now, they go, oh gosh, organic. Then I already have 1,000 fires to fight, and that's a situation that doesn't really motivate me, but rather demotivate me. And that's something where it is worth really looking at things jointly, talking about it, and spin it a bit further. Okay, I suggest you invite the Farmers Association as well. And we don't want to make it too easy. Right, I'd say thank you very much indeed. There's a question. Yes, please. No, I was just trying to use the break because I have to train to catch as well. So applause for workshop 4, and you're free to leave, of course. Okay, Mr. Moog will move up then, and we'll continue with the next workshop on my list. And I also attended that very briefly, Human Resources for Transformation Financing. Mr. Klein, there were rather few people in there, although that's what I remember from the last 2 events. It's really the crucial topic, especially for the finance sector. Yes, exactly, and that's what we identified quite quickly, that this is a risk-related topic which is probably widely underestimated in its dimension. Those who were there were highly motivated. We had a fascinating discussion. We actually sat in a circle of chairs, and I took down some very smart statements, and I said, I'll give you some grades for oral contributions. No, seriously, it was a fascinating discussion. And it was also rather terrifying to see that so few people were there. And I asked the question, who in this group is currently actively looking for staff who have some kind of ESG background, have something to do with sustainability? And half of them raised their hand. And we did a self-assessment saying how many of those raising their hand right now believe they will have found somebody by the end of the year. And that was something like 20%, the estimate, which is a massive problem. So, what were your findings, or also your surprising moments? It was a small group, but what were those eye-opening moments in your discussions? It was interesting to see where we were reaching consensus, where everybody agreed. And one such consensus was, and I noted this down, good grades for this one, sustainability places entirely new requirements for the banker's job profile. And that seamlessly ties up with the previous speaker. All of a sudden they have to know organic farming and biology and know about CO2. We are really looking for the jack of all trades here, and it doesn't work like that. And another fascinating finding, and I found that fascinating, sustainability, there was agreement on that, is not a topic that you can just read up on. Everybody agreed that it's a mindset matter. We need people here who are important in the company, who are ready to transport this topic, but who have the mindset that fits in with it. And that's what I found surprising, because I thought, well, you get on some external help, have your staff trained, and off you go to educate the general population. And everybody agreed that it doesn't work that way. And why is that? Because there are several stages, and we also got to that in our discussions. A very important group is the young employees, the Generation Y and Generation Z. They love that topic. And one great statement was, in a financial institution, in a bank, the experience very often is that sustainability is a topic driven from the bottom. The young people drive it forward, and those at the top sit up there and learn from those at the bottom, so to speak, what that topic is all about. And another interesting statement was, this generation, Generation Z, they'll be there very quickly, and they're highly motivated when they see something's being done about this topic. But once they realize nobody's serious about it, they'll be leaving in no time. And that takes us back to the risk. If you don't address the topic seriously with people who've got the right mindset for it, then you are running into a potentially fatal problem, because Generation Y and Z is a special one. They've got different expectations. And if they realize that people aren't serious about it, they'll simply leave. Now, spinning this further, would it be taking it one step too far to say that worst case would be you can't get any more skilled staff anymore if you're not heading in any serious way towards net zero or something like that? Answer, yes, absolutely. That's what my next card says. We talked about talent, and that was very interesting as well. And again, there was general agreement. There's so much competition there that classic HR work doesn't actually work anymore for talent. You need to do a lot more to attract talent. And this Generation Y and Z, which I find fascinating, it says they look at the work-life balance. They ask for what the employer does for social and sustainable matters. They want to make a difference. They want to be part of something bigger. And also somebody said there was an event for new staff, new employees, and at the beginning they also asked for terms like this, questions such as, what do you expect of us as an employer? And all of a sudden ESG was written large on the screen. So this is the generation where the word money or remuneration wasn't even mentioned. But again, for the talent amongst them, that goes without saying. Money they take for granted. It's not as if they come in and work for nothing, but they've got many more requirements and expectations. So we first tried to beat about the bush, but then we voiced it very openly. That was another very good grade here when somebody finally said it. The war of talents. It's no longer the war of talents, the war for talents. That's a no-brainer. But if we're perfectly honest, it's already the war for employees. We have a very difficult time even staffing the regular jobs. And Generation Y and Z sitting in front of us with a long list of expectations, and I'm speaking of my own experience here, you look at their certificates, their CVs, and think, well, it's not the top talent, but I'd be gratefully hiring that particular person because that's my only applicant. And that's another thing we learned. Everybody was surprised, and I can only confirm it. I find it hard to staff the regular positions. And if we don't get our positions staffed when it comes to sustainability, then we've got to train our internal staff. And then we talked about training for a long time. Innovative concepts, e-learning, self-based learning, responsible learning, and attracting those to the topic that are interested. Yes, exactly. That was one of these eye-opening moments. Another thing I learned, and there was agreement on it, it doesn't work to just get in some external help, send people on a training for 2 weeks, and then they can do ESG or they can do sustainability. Because again, it's a mindset thing. I've learned if you want to change the mindset, you need something which is customized for your company, fitting with your corporate culture in order to really reach your staff. So it was about in-house, about self-made solutions. And quite a magic moment was when we talked about self-learning. Everybody's experimenting with platforms that they invite employees to. They can offer whatever they want. They can say, I'll film a video, I'll offer a short training course myself, and that is well accepted, that works. And the employees, there were surveys on that, are even ready to do that in their free time, to do such trainings in their free time, if it's a topic that interests them. And we found that very interesting. And everybody in the workshop had some experience and was quite surprised to hear that others had similar experience with that. So really opening this kind of space for the employees themselves and inviting them to train each other. And, everybody admitted, having the courage to allow that. They can do it and they won't teach each other any shady things or do the wrong thing. But it's a high motivation approach to providing knowledge. It's also about letting go of control. Mr. Kuhn, you were looking rather skeptical? Yes, well, I wasn't expecting any discussion like that to come up, but I found it interesting. We just worked together with Great Place to Work. It's one of those systems that surveys companies about their employee motivation. And for 2 years now, the Great Place to Work guys also ask for sustainability aspects. So what's the connection if a company is committed to sustainability? Is that reflected in employee motivation? And the correlation is fantastic indeed. So it confirms what you were just saying. The stricter the organization's sustainability targets, the more the employees appreciate their organization and want to become involved, because they think we can't leave it to them. It's not something to be done by the executive board alone. I want to be in on it. And that's when it starts. And we also asked about how much time is dedicated to it. And very many people say, oh, I'd be happy to do it in my spare time and even involve my family, which is a great commitment. So just echoing what I've just heard and felt. Exactly. And that's where a certain scaling happens and the rest is history. It's exactly the kind of groundswell we're looking for. You just mentioned an important term that I want to repeat, the Vorstand, the executive board, something we discussed too. Again, it's driven from below. Now, younger generation, management, incentive structures. Please, what's about the top management? We discussed that too, and it turned out well, at best, there's an ESG group within the board, so they did that amongst themselves, or they had something printed out and they'll read through it. And we just talked about mindset. So with the management board, it works all of a sudden that they just quickly read up on it. And they're usually from an entirely different generation than those addressing the topic from the bottom. And we realized and stated that there's quite some potential for catching up here, because actually it would have to be driven from the top. And it's important that top management be staffed accordingly. But that seems to be more of a medium-term thing, which is perceived and seen, though. Well, I'll take that as a recommendation to the financial sector to think about this, both the new talent and also those established at the top already in the top floors. Thank you very much for that report.
Then let's turn to the next workshop. Number 2 was on sustainability, a sustainable capital market as an ecosystem for transformation finance. The bridge between SFDR and CSRD, the Sustainable Financial Disclosure Regulation, and CSRD that applies for non-financial companies from next year and in a staggered way from the smaller ones. And that will lead to certain challenges. And Mr. Reed, you were also one of the speakers there. Was it well attended? I think it was. Niels Hams? Yes. Let me also apologize to the virtual participants that we started late, but the discussion was lively, so that, it was online late, but there was an animated debate, and I hope it was still worth it. During the statements and the entire discussion, when it comes to the title of the workshop, it suggested a difference between the strictness of the different rules. You have the SFDR on the one hand, where certain indicators the stakeholders have to comply with even before the real economy has delivered. And then currently the CSRD, which is gradually applying, there seems to be some inequality and some dissatisfaction as well. As far as the quality of data is concerned, where BlackRock and BNP made clear that they aren't always comfortable working with the data because of the quality, especially because of the breadth. Only part of the real economy companies offer data, but also because of the scope. And when there's a disparity between the two standards, then of course that leads to a high level of dissatisfaction. So against that backdrop, especially when it comes to the current developments, the alignment is seen as very important. This is not about adding more and more, but a consensus on the minimum, the core of the data. A second aspect that BlackRock and BNP contributed and that I found very interesting, that was a reality check for impact investors, where only a small number specifies sustainability as the key impact, from 20% in Germany, and only 4% of institutional investors were named as numbers, which means a lot of educational work still has to happen. And BlackRock made it clear that, of course, there's an obligation of trustee, where the service provider has certain responsibilities, service provider in Germany, and the question is if the service is offered. As far as we are concerned, and we like the taxonomy, but what made us think twice is that we heard that the scope of the taxonomy data is not seen as sufficient. We'll have to see during the next round. But to date, the EU taxonomy is not yet used as levers. So let's wait and see to what extent it will be and when and in what form. So things are in progress, and I think many stakeholders in the financial sector would wish this to be more driven by customers. And there were two statements from the audience as well. The financial sector stakeholders and the sector itself, to what extent does it have to change to drive the development? Question, did you also touch upon the, what I would call, pressure with respect to the alliances in the financial sector? A second layer of requirements that they apply in addition to what comes from the regulatory architecture? The Net Zero Alliance, for example? Yes, okay. I think that's true in part. Real economy companies feel that partly, and financial sector stakeholders see that as an impetus. But when it comes to the SBTI, a large number of stakeholders looked at the 1.5-degree goal, not only committing to it, but also starting the process for it. But it hasn't really arrived in the mainstream, would be my summary. So there are more and more of these alliances, but essentially the data and data quality and data availability is the big challenge. The path towards decarbonization, that is mapped, and these initiatives can help to be more consistent in advancing along that path. What about any particular eye-openers or controversies? I think we discussed the current issues in a very open way. The energy shortage, the gas price cap that's being discussed and decided in Germany, and the energy sector, transformation finance there. The question that's in the focus there is the next step towards the hydrogen-based economy. What are the options? And from the audience, we heard the wish to be open in terms of technologies. Then the capital market was mentioned by the panel as a space for innovation. And we found that there are a lot of dilemmas at the moment, and there is not just one way forward, one right way forward. None of us wants to be cold in winter, and we'll want renewable energies, and only that if possible. But that world doesn't exist yet. So the question was, how can we overcome that, and what can we do in all of that? Then the gold standard, the EU taxonomy, or best in class, was another discussion. Are we on the way towards accelerating the transformation? And there was agreement that we're beyond that point, and that we have to take new steps now. The generic solutions, such as best in class in recent years, are no longer good enough. From that, I would say there must be more financial innovation, transition bonds and the like, correct? Yes, along those lines. And what we heard before, the dialogue between different stakeholders, that will help as well. This morning there were very honest statements from UBS and the small Sparkasse, but we are not there yet. The Slido survey showed that clearly this morning. We are on the path, but when it comes to transition bonds, the volume is nowhere near as with the green bonds. The offer is there, but not the demand. And there's a lot of uncertainty in the market. So that's one conclusion we see. The willingness of stakeholders, BNP, BlackRock, and the like, but also data providers such as Deutsche Börse as a platform to act, yes, but with the right data and in a consolidated way and with high quality in order to be able to offer these products. And I think that's a challenge for all of us. The next few years will be the time to take these steps together. And I think Niels Hubens also drew that conclusion in his final statement. This is something where we all have to do something, retail investors, professional investors, or employees in companies, as Christian Klein has just said, because we can all give a boost to this, from the top executive board level down to Generation Y. We all find that it's not only an issue in recruitment, but also in the processes then. So I think it's quite astonishing that this hasn't been overwhelmingly underlined. In our discussion, we also felt that fundamentally we have the same mindset, but we're not really sure that we've taken the same turn and the right turn, in fact. Great, Lothar Ried, thank you very much for that summary. Applause for this panel. And last but not least, Thomas Moog, workshop 1. And I heard the last 10 or 15 minutes of that workshop. Again, a big title, Challenges and Core Issues for Banking Alliances to ensure the success, to ensure that transformation finance is successful, and the international perspective as well. When Jasminka Endeley gave her concluding statement, I entered the room and the CDT tool was introduced. So you looked at quite a bit of detail in your group on alliances, and the Net Zero Banking Alliance Germany is very German and very specific. Could you really describe to us how it happened and what the result was? Indeed, I'll start chronologically. There were 2 parts. Part 1 was about a description on such a banking alliance outside of the usual competition or collaboration that, of course, is in line with antitrust rule. But that alliance, what can it do? And Georg Schirmann said a few words about the voluntary climate commitments, how it came about and what the result was. And the Net Zero Banking Alliance is the part of the community that said that we are willing to work on the implementation jointly. So where are we coming from was one aspect. Banks won't enter into voluntary commitments lightly. They have their own commitments and many things to cover. So explaining how this came about, what the rationale and motivation was. And we do feel that banks are thinking about what they can do alone by themselves. They're no longer waiting for regulation. And Petra Sandner added some words from 2 alliances she's in, alliances with the real economy. So not only banks working on this together. One was in real estate and the other one in aviation. And the key takeaway message from there was specific KPIs were developed by these alliances that the stakeholders then use. So useful material that is created. It's not a PR campaign for COP26 or 27, right? That's exactly right. And I think these banking alliances that are non-competitive, why competition? Well, it's demanding work. You're basically working on fundamental principles, and the way it's executed later on is in a competitive situation, of course. Well, but from Mr. Kuhn, I learned that cooperation is the new competition from the other workshop. Yes, things are happening. The banking sector may be least used to that, but things are moving. So, a dynamic movement. Were there any controversial moments, or was there a basic consensus? Well, let me first mention part 2, which was the Net Zero Banking Alliance Germany and its work program, the things we developed over the past 20 months. Last year at the summit, Ms. Gravenstein and Ms. Sandner were there and talked about basic training for employees in banks and presented a concept on that. And they invited everybody to offer feedback, and many consultancies turned to us, but also some banks. Ultimately, 4 banks implemented the concept or the curriculum, which was fully developed, more than 60 pages, and all 4 banks used that and turned that into a learning plan for their employees. And that's very nice to see that something tangible comes out and is used and is adapted to and used by the employees of the banks. And the idea is that it shouldn't feel like compliance or regulatory, but emphasize the opportunities for the bank linked to the transformation. In line with what we've heard from Mr. Klein on recruitment, that's correct. Interestingly, we also reached the point where we discussed motivation. Is a bonus needed? Incentivizing people? That wasn't really the original idea, but happened from the discussion. And there were only few that didn't agree that motivation is a pathway for this. And this basic training for the banks is voluntary, first of all. Well, one bank made it mandatory, and the others run it on a voluntary basis. When the curriculum was developed and the banks discussed it, they also wondered whether they should make this mandatory. And the project was a wonderful platform for an exchange on this question, among other things. And that's one of the benefits of such alliances. Alliances bring together, keep together peers with the same challenges and offer a platform to ask people left and right, how do you do this? And that's not very common, but that's quite a beautiful side effect of these alliances. That brings me to my next question. What's the future for such alliances? Are we working towards a situation where they will no longer be needed because we've achieved everything? Or will we still need them until it really works? Well, it's my opinion that the regulatory sector or community is always lagging behind, so there will always be principles such as biodiversity, for example, that will be relevant food for thought for such alliances. There will have to be alliance, just like the Net Zero Banking Alliance. The question is how to build it, and structure it, capacity, resources, and support. But yes, there are many subjects where the principle, the non-competitive principles, haven't been developed yet. Far away from what has happened in the sphere of CO2 emissions. So whenever companies are interested and want to do this, there are many points to tackle. And that's how I perceive it. This is an emerging spirit that's emerging across sectors, not only within a particular sector, but along the value chain where things have to be linked up. A lot has happened. 3 years ago, this would not have been so visible. Okay, any takeaway messages for the future? Any interesting follow-up points? First of all, as Net Zero Banking Alliance, we will continue our work. We're open to new members, of course. Onboarding is what we give some thought to and bring them up to speed, which isn't always easy, but we would definitely want to do that. But let me come back to the customer dialogue tool. This is where very tangible steps emerged that we will complete under the project. The first thing we asked the group was, what do you believe, will banks talk to their customers on a regular and structured basis? Will they talk to their customers about decarbonization? Well, we knew that it's a minority of banks doing that on a regular basis, but it made clear that something is happening. It wasn't zero. And then we continued to do some work on what's needed for such a customer dialogue. And the important word is dialogue. Of course, you can send out a questionnaire as a PDF file, but ultimately there's a relationship between customers and the bank, and the relationship is about people. So how can you make sure that something which is so little rehearsed can be integrated into the practice of talks and dialogue so that it's not an extra ESG talk? And for that, we offer a platform that suggests some questions for 2 sectors, for customers from the real economy in those 2 sectors, that is. And feedback to customers is also a feature of the platform, offering the customer a view on where they stand. Where it's not so easy, where we tell a customer you're green or orange or green, amber or red in that, and there's something you have to rehearse. That also came out from the Slido results. What is needed for that real economy talk? And skills came up often. Capacity, knowledge, courage, it said as well. So that was quite interesting, the things that it takes. And we related that to the Net Zero Banking Alliance, the whole chain sequence, and supporting that from the project. This is where we're offering input as well. But there are a number of things that we can't work on that have to do with the way how the bank is managed. And that led again to the point of incentives. How can it be organized in such a way so that it happens? What car does the boss of the company drive was a question, actually. The tone from the top was certainly mentioned. Okay, thank you very much for that rich report from the workshop, and all the best for your continued work in that network. And thank you very much, Thomas Mork, for being the rapporteur. To be continued. And with that, let me kindly dismiss the concluding panel, and let me announce and ask the last guest to join us.
She's well known in the sustainable finance landscape here in this room, and last year she also headed a workshop, and I think she has had a career in which her social and ecological responsibility has always been visible. She founded an environmentalist group at the age of 13. And she's probably the only executive director of a pension fund who'd ever lashed herself to a freighter carrying nuclear waste. She allowed me to tell you this. She's now on the executive of the Hannoversche Kasse pension fund, responsible for sustainability. Before this, she was a general manager for the Bank of the Essen Diocese, and she was a partner in the IMO advisory, responsible for sustainable investment. And since this year, she has been the chair of the Sustainable Finance Advisory Committee of the federal government. Welcome, Silke Stremlau. Thank you very much, Ms. Bogner, for your kind words of introduction. Now I have the great task of keeping you awake for a while before you catch your train and go home. Yvonne Deramin and Carsten Löffler will then make a few closing remarks. But let's now review what we've discussed so hotly and see some link to the work of the committee and our advice to the government. I must say I'm a bit toing and froing when I look at things. When I look at the audience and the attendance, it's clearly more colorful, more feminine, more diverse than at previous meetings. And I think transformation finance, and the term transformation, by the way, this has arrived in people's minds. It has become common, nearly a buzzword. A few years ago, it was quite different. At that time, we did an annual report which said transformation begins with the me. But today everybody agrees that we need this transformation, that it's a necessity. I attended the last workshop on food, And it really spoke to my heart because there were practitioners at the table. It was about emotions. It was quite clearly about how to develop farming, how to get the financing models. It wasn't just about taxonomy and Article 8 and Article 9 and finance people who told me during the break that they were so happy to be at the golf course last summer. I must say, guys, where are you standing in the financial industry? Haven't you woken up? We're experiencing one of the biggest crises of these days. We have this energy crisis and energy war, really, that is going on in the Ukraine. We've had the hottest summer ever. And we'll see what is coming the next few years. It will be even more fun. Then there is this crisis of democracy when I look at the attack against the capital, and the AfD right-wing party is slightly behind the Green Party in votes they received at the election in Lower Saxony. And we have climate change. So a new start is absolutely necessary in the financial industry, and a day like this is certainly a good thing. And I'd like to compliment the cluster and the VFU and Baum. I think this is where this impulse comes from. Exchange with the real economy. What do you really need in order to bring about this transformation? What financing tools? What know-how? What human resources? What do you wish from the financial industry? And it became quite clear in the workshop. We need different instruments for support following sustainability and carbon impact. There's a big gap yet within the development banks. Then what interaction is needed between public and private capital? And I am glad you were able to read this in the press. The advisory committee was constituted, and you've heard we had this great offsite at Leipzig with the Saxony Development Bank. And we discussed for 2 days and defined our working program. And this is a great thing about this committee, that so many different people are coming together. People from family-owned companies who've only focused on this issue the last 2 years. And I must say, look, your business model won't have a future 10 years from now if you're not transforming completely. If you don't come up with something completely new, you won't have a future. Nobody dares say this yet, as you heard from the panel. The banks don't dare say this yet. The risk models are not yet there. The quantitative numbers are not there yet. But really facing up to this truth, being so radical as is needed. And I think we've covered this quite well on the committee. The financial industry, civil society and real economy are at the same table. Whether we make it, meeting all the expectations we've often heard, the committee can do this, the committee can do that. Look, we're just volunteers. We've got full-time jobs, but still we intend to do one thing, and there's this great spirit in the room. At the end of the term, we don't just want to present a 120-page report, which will then more or less be overlooked during the electoral campaign. We want to be shorter, more action-oriented, and more striking. We want to come up with recommendations and things rapidly that are striking, and want to try to influence politics, an attempt to influence politics. We're going to start in the first quarter, 23, and there is some preparatory work for shareholders, for the dialogue at an equal footing, talking about transformation paths and so on. This will be successful. Secondly, the traffic lights on sustainability, giving orientation to investors so that it's quite clear when you buy a financial product. Is it an insurance company? Is it a building society? What are the sustainability criteria, or aren't there any? Like when you buy a refrigerator, sustainability symbols on the financial products. We hear about this from the Ministry of Finance, and I think it will also meet with a good response from the banks, just like data and data infrastructure, what needs to be done. Can the blockchain be helpful? And what does the European single access point have to be like? Data will be a major issue that we'll focus on the advisory committee, and then of course reporting, measuring, testing. Lothar just presented this on the podium. If we as investors don't know what's happening in those companies, we can't invest in them. We don't want any new reporting standard. There is enough. What we want to have is hear critical voices, or be a critical voice, be sparring partners to the real economy, to the financial industry. And a weighty group of international framework setting and the cooperation between the federal government, the states and the local government. This was mentioned several times. All this transformation, financial change and energy reform will happen at the local level. Know-how needs to be built there, the money needs to go there. And on Tuesday I met with 120 leaders of savings banks. And they said we are in close contact with the industry, but the permits take too long. It takes a year. And so the question was, what would it be like if you think of all these stacks of applications for permits? What would it be like if somebody had a look at those that have great transformation impact and they'll bypass or jump the queue? I thought this was an interesting suggestion. I don't know what the German local governments will say, but I quite liked it. And so do make use of this committee. Contact the 34 members, not just the chairs. We're interested in this and will pass this on and may even kick the government. Not everything will become public, but we'll make use of the channels we have. And finally, what I would wish for the next Sustainable Finance Summit is more young people who can kick the behinds of the financial industry. I was at the Leuphana Uni the other day and there was a panel from Fossil Free, a student and a representative of the NordLB Bank, and they really grilled this bank representative because the 40 million that the Leuphana Uni has on a day money account was not invested according to sustainable criteria. And I was so happy when I saw this. There was so much fire, so much enthusiasm, so much radicalism. You've just heard it about the generations Y and Z. They've understood things. They're more radical and more demanding. And I think this would be a good thing. You can't just talk about inflation. That doesn't really touch these people so much. Maybe we buy one bread roll less on Sunday morning or go out to the restaurant less. But this would get on my nerves completely, all this saturation. I would ask, what did you get wrong the last 20, 30 years? Why don't you get things done? Why are you why are you discussing all these small things? I mean, taxonomy and so on, SFRD and so on, this needs to be discussed. But we need to ask ourselves, and I think this is a central question, where's the best leverage? How can we speed up this debate and not lose ourselves in petty things, but where's the biggest lever so that we can get out of these things? And I think it's sustainable finance. This is one way towards solutions, a way out of these crises. So let me invite you, take this narrative back home to your own organizations. Talk about it. Let's not just get stuck in this crisis and ignore the news, but take it as a space for a solution. If we make an effort, the solutions are there. We heard a lot about it today. Sustainable finance as the financial transformation behind everything that enables things, that provides the funds. Let's get started, let's do something, and we can move something. Thank you very much indeed for this rally call. Silke Stremler. Have a safe journey home. Now there's two slider questions I'd like to ask you in conclusion, because they make a lot of sense for our documentation. First, a word cloud. The two Sustainable Finance Summits so far, what did you feel was enriching? Use just one word. It could be a short word or a long word. I hope a few people are also still with us online. So what did you like, or what did you find enriching in this year's Sustainable Finance Summit? That's what I would also like to write down here. Clear language and exchange. Maybe we need to talk to each other even more, because the 2 years of COVID have made exchange difficult, although new paths, digital paths were opened up and practiced, then including the real economy. This was the first summit, and I've been involved for 10 years, the first summit at which we had a farmer and the boss of the German Meteorological Service. I'd like to see more of this. It was great. Then talk in a clear language, and then the cooperation between the real economy and finance. 2030 is only 8 years from now. Clear language, clear words. I see a certain consensus here in the room. Great. Let's then move on to the last question. All the information you've heard today, all the input you heard today, what players can bring about change in your mind? Change until we get to transformation. Is it the financial industry, which is very well represented today, or the real economy, which was also involved, then the EU level, mentioned again and again with keywords like taxonomy and international networking, regulation, which at times is still a bit bumpy and in an unfortunate sequence, the federal government, the German government, who've certainly started about doing things, but as we discussed at the summit last year, could come up with an update on the sustainable finance strategy, then regulators or the German states or a central platform as proposed by the Sustainable Finance Advisory Committee. So what seems to be at the top is here the interaction between the real economy and the financial industry and the EU level. Well, this means a lot, I think, for the next Sustainable Finance Summit, number 7 then. So let me ask our hosts to come up from the cluster, from Baum and from the VFU for just a few concluding remarks. Go ahead. Right. The day is coming to an end. Thank you very much. Relatively many people are still here. Great. I won't hold a long farewell speech. Fear not. But what I would like to take home from today is I've heard about so many different suggestions. So what was a real highlight today was the way in which we got talking to each other, both here on the podium. There were intense conversations. You don't see this so often, where people were really struggling. And then the next thing, good conversations out there at the tables, taking a bit of time. And what I personally liked, the workshop in which I participated, I felt it was very inspiring. A few ideas emerged there, and we had discussed them a few years ago with the people involved, also at the advisory committee. And a switch seems to have been flipped, really. There was more of a welcome culture for new ideas and really trying to do things off the well-trodden paths. And this trying is what I'm taking home. Thank you very much. And if you think of all the people who were involved in organizing, Klaus, the team, who are behind all of this. Let's not forget, of course, Medienreich, our service company for all the technical services. Things are running very well. We are working together very well. And then I'd like to thank you very much. Go ahead. Well, what I learned today in my conversations is I'm an investor and a sustainable business angel, because if you think things through with comprehensive accounting, then we invest in partnership, in good partnership, and you need to fight on these things. What is sustainable? What does this term mean? sustainable economy. We invest in networks, we invest in events like this. We know this is something that cannot be done during regular working hours, and this investment makes it so valuable. If so much comes back, this is the return on investment, like discussions and the excitement in the workshops and what you're giving back to us as organizers, which will also be a push for our next few projects. And I can only tell you Baum is going to invest further in this. We saw this in the final poll. The real economy is now seen as a central player, and we intend to do quite a lot of things within Baum. We're just a small and ambitious and committed, very cuddly association of companies clearly focusing on the limits of the planet and sustainability targets globally. So we really intend to go out into the field where the local heroes are not so much. We are trying to bring about more pressure for transformation. We need to be aware of the power of the factual in ecology, of the facts we often have in areas with weak infrastructures, if we don't invest in social cohesion. Let me invite you today on November the 22nd, we are continuing with a regional dialogue starting at the Geestland city. And we are discussing in the Elbe region the financial risk of extreme weather. We are going to the island of Helgoland, to Thuringia, to the Black Forest, discussing hydro energy and what needs to be changed in energy generation, and then also the climate risks. What will they mean for the owners of properties if they don't prepare? And let's now look back. This year is the European Year of Youth. How did I notice this? I learned from our partner Silke Hochmuth, who yesterday at Leipzig organized the Leipzig Financial Forum with young people. And she discussed shaping the economy of the future, or the economy that has a future. What is it like? And let me also invite you warmly for the 9th and 10th May. You should make a note. We're going to the Old Stock Exchange of Leipzig for the 5th Leipzig Financial Forum, where we're going to discuss these critical points of the interaction of development banks and financial industry, investors and public finance. Baum is also a partner in this. It's the little brother or sister of this big sustainable financial summit. Thank you very much for this excellent partnership, and I'll give you a book as a present, one which I produced last year on the retirement of my predecessor with Baum e.V. And you know, it's always worthwhile. It's only worthwhile to print something if 3 people read something. So do pass the book on, because only from 3 readers on is it worthwhile to print something. So I'll ask you about who read it. So read through it in an alphabetical order. That's a neutral and fair thing. Do we have to write an exam? No, I won't check on that. Well, thanks very much, Christina and Carsten, for this opportunity to run this great event. It's been a feast. A feast. It was also a feast for me. I won't add so much content-wise, but my most important learning, I'd like to share this with you. Networks like ours may have a special role in spreading new knowledge throughout our own networks. Networking with each other can bring about a multiplier effect, and apart from this, I fully agree with the word cloud we saw towards the end. Exchange, urgency, clear language, these are the things. And I think this is what I'm taking home. Thank you very much to the cooperation partners of Cluster and Baum. Here's Baum. And I'd like to thank all of you for attending, and I'd also like to thank the Cluster team who did so much to support this event, and also I'd like to thank my colleagues of VFU. Great, I'm also happy to also add one last nuance. I'd like to thank the whole group. It's been a great achievement that we were able to organize this event with so many people who supported this in the background, and with so many people here who listened and asked and discussed. So many of you who attended our panels, our workshops and our keynotes. And this brings me to 3 important points that I see for sustainable finance that are important, that we should keep in mind in our action in our day-to-day. First, cooperation, then whether it's intergenerational and or the different disciplines or issues, be it the different industries, the real economy, the financial industry, and so on. Only in cooperation will we make progress, because otherwise we might not see the forest for the trees. Together we will make progress. Then, apart all the positive things we've heard, can we really make it, especially when we think of the 1.5 degree target? To be quite honest, at times I feel we're really running into depression from waiting and seeing. But this can't be serious. As Dr. Luhrmann said this morning, in Germany, we already reached the planetary limits in May, and all over the world it was in July. So we need to get better on this. Quite specifically, we need to look at ourselves and not look at what the others are doing. We should determine our own speed, and we still have it in our hands. Let's go on, let's keep the level up, and this brings me to the 3rd item. Let's be serious. Controversy is a good thing, as we've seen today. We don't have time for just complimenting each other. Neither the economy nor politics and the economy can do this. We have a responsibility. Younger generations were mentioned. They have a certain claim, and we have to face up to this. And we will have to be held accountable if we are not able to answer these questions. So we need to dispute and argue, and then we can have a tea or a beer together and everything is fine. But we must not take the easy way. We must not allow each other to do things. We need to resist each other, and then we'll be able together to make each other better and faster above all. We're only starting. And against this background, I'm happy, no matter what the next summit will be like, no matter what will happen in the meantime. I'll be very happy to hear from many of you. We're all looking forward to this. Do give us feedback. Do tell us about improvements. Do also give us your negative feedback. This will also help us improve. But now I suggest to you at home at your screens and to you here in the room, let me thank you for participating, for your interest, for your participation, for your passion. All the best to you, and have a safe journey home and a nice weekend.